Welcome to the Rise and Wander podcast, where we'll explore adventure, spirituality, and empowerment through the outdoors and beyond. Join me, Carla Amador, as we focus on topics around the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional benefits derived through the outdoors. You'll also hear inspiring stories, get educated, and more. Let's get started. I wanted to take a moment to thank this season's Rise and Wander podcast sponsor, REI. REI is the outdoor gear retailer of the 52 Hike Challenge. I've been a member since I started my 52 hikes in 2012, and they've helped outfit me for all things hiking and outdoors since then. Becoming a member has many perks like 10% back annually on eligible purchases, a satisfaction guarantee, which gives you up to a year to return any purchases you aren't satisfied with, free shipping in the US, and so much more. Please visit them at rei.com. Join me, Carla Amador, for my new offering and program, Rise, a fully supported transformation program in which you complete 52 hikes while going through the 12 steps I've developed for healing and transformation through the outdoors. Each month, we'll go through a different topic with guided weekly exercises, one-on-one coaching with me, and access to a supportive community. This program is for anyone going through a life transition, those looking for a change, and anyone looking for accountability and guidance in their outdoors journey. Learn more and sign up at 52hikechallenge.com. Welcome back to Rise and Wander. This is episode 4. Today we're going to focus on the following. So you've decided to hike the Camino de Santiago. Now what? I have 4 things you need to do next as you're getting ready for this huge goal. And I really hope it's going to help you as you're planning your trip. So first thing you need to do, step 1, is you need to commit to your goal. So now that you've set this goal to hike the Camino, you've made the biggest step. You've taken the biggest stand for yourself. You're saying, I'm going to do this thing. So hopefully you have your dates in mind and you're ready to go. So for me, that meant I did have an idea of dates already, and I then went ahead and booked my flight. So of course, that way I could set this goal in stone and I couldn't back away when all of a sudden I start doubting myself, etc. So of course, there is so much more that needs to happen. So step 1 is commitment, and go ahead and book that ticket, that flight, and the rest will come together. I really do hope that you're giving yourself a little bit of time, a couple, hopefully weeks, if not months or a year, to plan this endeavor. But I'm not saying you can't do it with a couple weeks. Anything is possible if you're good at planning and you can coordinate and get all the things you need, which I'm going to guide you through. All right, so we've got step 1 down. So step 2, now you have to focus on planning. Okay, so this is going to be the research phase. This is going to be the step that is going to take you the longest, and you're going to need to do your research, your due diligence. So for me, like I mentioned earlier, I really do hope that you already know what route you're taking. So if you haven't, that's okay. This is a part of that phase, but most likely you do need to know your route so that you can go ahead and commit and buy your flight and all of that. But anyways, if you haven't, and you're still committed, that's fine. Go ahead and then take step 2, which is the planning phase. Figure out what route you're going to take. And then you're going to start doing your research, right? You're going to buy your books that you need. You're going to go research blogs. You're going to look up information like this podcast. I also want to share that there's classes, like online classes that people sometimes host for these types of trips. I actually know that rei.com offers classes on this specific topic. So you can go to their classes. The link is on their page. And then under there, you can search Camino de Santiago and see what pops up. I know I saw some classes in Phoenix as we were talking now, and they have them all around. But yeah, go ahead and look that up. There may be one close to you. There may not be, but Another option is obviously looking online, looking on YouTube. There's so many resources out there. So once I had decided that I was going to take the Portuguese route, I ended up finding this blog called the Stingy Nomads Camino Portuguese Guide. The blog is actually the Stingy Nomads. And the topic of this specific blog, it's the Portuguese guide. And I know they update it often. So anyways, I used their itinerary as basically a template for myself. And that's one of the top things I would say as you're planning is look up other templates so that you don't have to like plan all the steps. You can follow someone's, oh, this day we hiked about 10 miles per hour. This is where we stopped. Now, obviously, that kind of depth of level of planning is also going to depend on your schedule. If you have more time and you can go more leisurely, you don't have to plan so strictly. In my case, I had to plan more strict because we were going to go to other places and I had booked hotels every night. So I needed to plan those kinds of details. But a traditional pilgrim, you get up in the morning, you start at your first albergue, you hike as long as you want, you get to the next lodge, and then you decide to stay there or keep hiking. You have a lot more flexibility. Pros and cons to that are that if you are a pilgrim doing the traditional and staying at the albergues, sometimes you can get to them and they may not have space. So then you'll have to go to the next one and basically wander until you find one. For me and my mom, I knew that I didn't want to have that sort of experience. In addition, we couldn't carry all our things because we were going to be traveling afterwards. And like I said, I wasn't sure how my mom was going to do. And I knew that was going to be intense for her. Yeah, basically, for that reason, it's really important to know every day where you're going to start, how many miles you want to walk, have a rough idea of where you're going to break. So, breaking your days down, plotting. I think a lot of the pilgrims we spoke with were doing about 8 miles a day at minimum. You can obviously go up. You could do 15 miles in a day if that's more your flow. That's going to have to depend on your pace. But I can tell you something that the more leisurely people went, the less stressed they were and the more relaxed. Because I know for my mom and I, even when we had our plan, our schedule, there were times where we're like, oh my gosh, look at this lodge. It looks really cute. I wish we could stay here. Or we were feeling like, oh my gosh, it's getting late and we're not where we need to be. So those are things to consider. And a lot of the pilgrims told us, like, you have to get up early because sometimes you get to the lodges and then they are fully booked. So that can also be a little bit stressful. And I know that the Camino has become extremely popular, especially the French way. And so I heard a lot of pilgrims had been transitioning from that into the Portuguese route because of things like lack of lodging. And it was just so busy. Definitely when you're planning, that's going to also help you to plan when do you want to go? How are the conditions? What kind of gear you'll need to bring? So this is why planning is of the essence. Planning is so important. That brings me to step 3, which is after you're done planning, have an idea of what route you're going to take, how long you want to be on the trail, how you want to go. Do I want to be a traditional pilgrim? Do I want to go with more of a comfort? Also, just side note, some people feel that, oh, you're not a traditional pilgrim if you don't carry everything and stay in the albergues. So it's really up to you. Do what works for you. I know for us, it just was not really realistic to do it that way. Like I said, given the conditions of my specific trip. And so you can really also go super, super luxurious and have a company book the whole thing. You could go with a group. I met a really wonderful person on the trail that was a guide, and he had brought all these people on this trek and he organized it. And shout out to Marcus Pavani. I called him our trail angel. He was so incredibly kind and included us sometimes with his group. And it was really cool because we were doing this at the same time. So we'd see them at some of the cafes. And then at the end, he was actually gifting or giving the certificates to his groups. That in itself is like such a great way to potentially experience the Camino, make new friends, go with people. So you have so many options. You can also plan, am I going on my own? Am I going with someone? So this planning phase really helps you to work through all of those different questions and get more concrete. And then obviously I'm huge about writing and like setting goals down on pieces of paper. So you can write in a journal. I usually use like a Google Doc, and then I'll write down like agenda, itinerary, plans, to-dos, weather, and all of that. All right. So let's go to step 3. What is the next thing I need to do? Then you need to commit to your training plan. Hopefully, in your planning, you've booked your ticket. And then, yeah, next thing you're going to do is you're going to commit to your training plans. Training for me was pretty easy because I do take my 52 hikes every year, and I do the 52 hike challenge every year. So I'm always out there. So that was actually really helpful. But I knew that on the longest day I would be hiking 16 miles. And I also knew that on any other given day I would be hiking anywhere from 6 to 12 miles. So I knew that I had to be in shape for that level of miles every single day. So I kept going out and doing 8-mile plus hike, 10-mile hikes, just to prepare myself. A lot of things with elevation gain. For those of you that are new, that is basically like going up a steep hill, mountain, etc., and you work your way up to that. Let's just say you're new to hiking and you don't know where to start. First off, at minimum, you should be training 8 weeks prior, and even 12 weeks is ideal. But basically, what you're going to do is, let's say, first thing is commit to 52 hikes. Make it a goal to get outside and get started little by little. You can go on, let's say, a 2-mile hike one week, and then the following week, go for like a 4-mile hike. And the next week, you're going to go for a 6-mile hike, and so on. Hopefully, as you're training for something like this, you're actually going at least 2 to 3 times a week. You're getting out hiking and doing elevation gain and increasing your mileage. And you're also getting out to the gym and doing strength training exercises with weights. You're potentially even going to yoga to do some of the strength training, or maybe even just some ability to replenish yourself through something like yin yoga. So you're stretching and all of that. Also, you're going to want to increase your elevation gain. Okay. So that, just for beginners, I would say start with no more than 5 miles, no more than 5 to 800 feet of elevation gain, because that is going to be some gain. And just to get your body adjusted to that. And as you are continuing to go, you can then increase your elevation gain, your mileage. Eventually, you would want to get to like a 4,000 elevation gain, let's say 15-mile hike. That would be your ultimate goal. So again, remember what I said earlier on in the podcast, you're working your way backwards when you're doing all of this. So let's say you're going to go do the Camino April 1st. You would have started January 1st. And then your ultimate goal is by April 1st, I want to be able to hike 16 miles and do 4,000 feet of elevation gain. So you're going to basically start with your guide, your own little training schedule and plan, and say by March 31st, I want to do a 16-mile hike, 3,000 feet. You'll need to go on Alltrails, which is what I use and recommend for finding hikes, and you'll look for something like that and you'll set that top goal, right? And then let's just say I have my dates close, but you get the picture. And then before that, you're like, okay, the week prior, I want to be able to do a 15-mile hike with 2,800 feet of elevation gain. And then the week before, I want to be able to do a hike that's at least 14 miles with 2,500 feet of elevation gain, etc. So you're basically working your way backwards. And actually, that formula is used not only in something like planning your hikes, but also for things like your business, other goals that you have. Doing it this way really helps you to break it down and see the progress. Okay. So that's really important. You want to start training at least a minimum of 8 weeks before, no less than 8 weeks before, and give yourself up to 12 weeks of training. And also just take it easy. Don't try to go to that next extreme, because you can really injure yourself. So I know I'm focusing more on beginners, but I just wanted all of you who have been hiking a long time, you probably know this already. But like I said, I saw so many people out on the trails suffering with things like blisters and foot pain, and just a lot of people were having injuries. And so this will avoid you having those injuries, because hopefully with this training plan, you're training with your gear, your shoes, And then as you're going and doing this training plan, you're also adding more weight to your pack so that you do have the strength to carry the extra things you're going to carry, especially if you're doing it the traditional way. So let's move on. We're going to talk a little bit about step 4, which is logistics. Okay. So logistics is going to be huge. I hinted at this when you're in the planning phase, but your logistics are actually going to be more detailed. And this was one of the most awesome things about the Camino is that there are so many services available to pilgrims now. And that made the Camino that much more special and allowed my mom and I to explore it without carrying everything. For us, we had to think about, do we want luggage transport? And of course, we did need it because we were traveling afterwards and we had other gear that we needed. So what we did is we actually brought 2 about 30-liter packs, and that's all we had with us. So we knew we would carry one on the trail, and every day we were sending our individual other packs in the luggage with the transport services. So what I did is, you can look up online. I used Top Santiago, and you can also ask wherever you're staying, they'll give you recommendations. But usually that company can basically pick up from day 1 until your last day or whatever days you need transport. Now, I believe they sometimes can do discounts if you book them for the whole leg of the trip. And also, like, you can send them your itinerary and then they will let you know where they can pick up, where they can't pick up, where they can potentially drop off in case they can't drop off at a place in your itinerary. And I'll talk more about that since we're talking about the logistics. Talking about hotels and stays and things like that, basically, there were times where we booked stuff that was more geared towards pilgrims, which I highly recommend because usually these stays are going to be closer to the trail, really close. And then the transport is usually going to be able to transport your stuff to those stays. But a lot of times, whenever we had private accommodations, things like Airbnb. And I know some albergues will not accept luggage, and some of those didn't accept. So we had to go pick it up somewhere else. They usually were very helpful in helping us, thankfully. But the thing that can happen is that one day we had to pick up 5-10 minutes from our hotel, and carrying like a big piece of luggage after you've been walking all day is not the most ideal thing. Some albergues and private lodges will take the luggage. So you just have to call around. And that's, again, a part of that big planning. Another thing about the hotels and stays is you really want to map out where they are, because there were a few times where we picked places that were not close to the trailhead, and that just added additional logistics for us that we had to somehow get to the trailhead. So there were a few days where we needed to coordinate that. And that also will help you to coordinate like your hike for that day, because there were times where we were expecting to be done like in 10 miles, but then it was like, oh, actually our hotel is at the end of that city. And now it's another 2 miles of walking, and we were exhausted by that time. So you really do want to get down to the nitty gritty of like mileage, and ways you can do that include like using the app that I used. Actually, the app that I used was pretty helpful. It was the Buen Camino app. And I also used, like I said, an itinerary from the Stingy Nomads, and that kind of gave me an idea of mileage between cities. But definitely use some form of mapping system for yourself. And there's so many options out there. So I won't quote a specific one because there's different trails, but just do yourself a favor and really take the time to plan out where you're going to be and where you're going to stay so that you avoid those kinds of things. So something that was really cool is that there is so much culture around the peregrino, which is what they call people trekking this, walking this. Pilgrims is another word, but there's so many businesses catering to the pilgrim. And that included things like having pilgrim menus at lodges, which allowed you to sit with other pilgrims and talk about your day over wine and a delicious meal. Or sometimes there were restaurants that had pilgrim meals, which were set menus, and costs depend. Every city was different. Sometimes I saw them, I think, let's say 12, 15 to it could be $20 or more, depending on where you're staying. But it was a really nice way to experience a really good meal that included like dessert and appetizers and wine. And like I said, you're talking with people. And it was just one of the most special things about the Camino for me, I think, was having these pilgrim menus. But also, as you're going through and you're doing this trek, you're going to actually, here it is. You are going to have your credentials. So here's an example of mine. I know those of you listening can't see it, but for those of you watching me online, you'll see the book I'm holding up. This is where I collected my stamps. So you can get these credentials, your stamps at the hotels, at different cafes throughout the day. So as you're hiking, you're going to come across so many different amazing, incredible people. So don't worry too much. But I also will say that do some research on your stops, because there were a few days where like some cafes were not open. And so we were like, oh my gosh, like we literally almost didn't have enough water by the time we got to the next village, because we were expecting there to be more services on the way. And I forgot what day it was, but there was one day where a lot of the services were closed. So you want to do your research and kind of find out like, where can I refill my water? A good rule of thumb is try to carry at least 2.5 liters of water. We ended up going in a season that actually was particularly warm. So that day that happened to us, we didn't expect for it to be as hot as it was. It was a really warm day out on the trail, and we consumed more water than we thought. So yes, of course, we were fine, and we eventually got to a cafe, but you will want to do that kind of research. Regarding where you're going to be staying, accommodations are going to be different. If you stay in an albergue, it's going to be anywhere from 80 to 20 euros per night. Like I said, my mom and I decided to stay in hotels or more stays or private homes, and we spent about $50-ish per night per person. So that gives you an idea. So you can go as low as 8 to 50 or even more, right? Depending on how fancy you want to go. And there are fancy and gorgeous, beautiful accommodations on the trail. We stayed at some incredible places that just made the Camino that much more special. Let's see, some other small things. As you are planning out where to stay, you can read reviews and find out like how close is it to the trail. You can call for asking questions, email. That was a lot of the ways how I got in touch with a lot of the hosts and got information like who should I use for transport, and making sure that my transportation service would help me throughout the whole trek. And also, since the Portuguese route is, there's times where you go through little villages and such, but for us, there were a few times where we did have to take, like I said, a taxi to our hotel because it was like not on trail. And we did do that a few times. And mainly this was in the beginning of the trip. You want to look at services like that, depending on your situation. And let's see what else. Yeah. So I had a tip that I wanted to share, which was we brought a collapsible duffel bag. And that way, every day we could put all our things in that and just send that with the guiding service. And then whenever we were not using it, it was flat. And for example, if for some reason we would have purchased some things on the hike, then we would be able to easily have this extra bag that we could use. And then let's see, is there anything else? Okay, yes. So a part of your logistics planning will be, how do I get this? How do I get the pilgrim credentials? Wherever you're going to start, as you're doing your research, you need to look up, where do I pick up my pilgrim credentials? For us, like I said, we did the Camino Portuguese. We started in Porto. I found out that you get it at the Sé Cathedral. That's SE Cathedral. And then, of course, I also was like, wait, where do I pick it up in the cathedral? So I did actually wait in line because I was like, that line seems like it might be it. So you might have to ask questions when you get there, or do more research. But anyways, we waited in line, and then sure enough, we went in to the museum, paid our $3, got our booklets, and then basically that was it. I knew where we were going to start. And once you get your booklet and you have your guide. You do need to have like a breakdown of the trails. So I used partially the Buen Camino app and also some Alltrails because I was able to get some of the sections. I also used my friend Drew's website for some planning and stuff like that and just tips. And let's see, I'm trying to think what else would be important for you to think about. Yeah, just really having a guide. But once you're on the Camino, I do want to say this. Once you're on the Camino, you are going to be guided. There's plaques and signs and there's arrows, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the following episodes. And which leads me to the last thing, which is now that you have done your planning, the next stage is your gear. And we're going to talk all about gear in the next episode. So I hope this gave you the first 4 steps that you're going to take after you've decided to hike the Camino. And I really hope that it's helpful and you're not alone in this. So many people have done the Camino before you, and just commit, plan, decide what works for you, and have an amazing time getting ready for this trip because the planning phase is like a big part of the whole thing. It's a part of that journey that you're going to go on. And I do really hope that these tips help you as you're planning and thinking about it. And if you have any other tips, if you've hiked the Camino, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have additional questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And I really hope that this has inspired you and that you have a wonderful Camino. Buen Camino. I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.